There's just more and more demand for forest products. The wood to build your house, the paper to write on, that sort of thing is growing at basically at the same rate our population in the US and the population globally is growing. So forestry in the eastern US is what we're trying to examine. The goal essentially for the overall LEAP project is to make recommendations for one type of harvesting over another. And essentially people aren't gonna stop needing wood anytime soon. It's just how can we figure out how to produce wood in a way that's sustainable for not only the forest environment, but for the animals that live within it.
To test wood frog responses to cutting, Sean applied different management techniques like clear cutting, partial cutting, and no cutting in a pie-shaped pattern to 4 different vernal pools in Maine.
What we're doing is monitoring the response of the amphibians to these harvests. And we do that in a couple of different ways. I've used radio telemetry. It's like playing a game of hot or colder. You can hear the little beep that I'm listening to. And then I basically just, as I get closer to the frog, the beep will get louder, and eventually it'll get to the point where I can actually see the frog, hopefully.
Sean collects information on different aspects of the location where he finds each frog, including the presence of water, air temperature, and vegetation types.
So if I had to venture a guess, I'd say he's right underneath here. But we're gonna see if we can actually see him.
After collecting data from many locations, he uses their movement patterns, habitat choices, and behavior to determine their responses to different forest management types.
We also use these drift fences, and essentially the amphibian hops along, runs into the fence, and then tries to go around the fence and falls into a coffee can that we've stuck in the ground. Well, I'm looking at the animals coming back into the pond now, and I mark everybody with a microchip. And I've got this pit tag reader, which is a homemade reader, which is actually supposed to look more like a metal detector than anything. And so I put a pit tag in her back, and basically all that is giving me is a 10-digit number that I can identify this female by. And so I'm just gonna read the code there, and the little beep tells me that it's red. So I catch them today during the day at the drift fences, but to figure out how it's affecting their breeding success, I gotta go out and watch the frogs. I wander around the pond at night, listening to the calling frogs and watching for females paired up with males. They go into what's called implexus, with the male sitting on the back of the female. I look for those paired up males and females and basically wait until the female lays eggs. And then I figure out, based on the little microchip, who's who and who mated with who. I can look at how the treatment that they came from, either the clear cut or the partial harvest or the control forest, affects their breeding success. They're a great indicator species. They've been called the canary in the mine, that sort of thing. And essentially, the reasons they're a good canary is that they don't move much. They're really tied to whatever you do in that area. And so they form a link between the aquatic environment and the terrestrial environment.
Sean is finding that the wood frogs primarily stay in the unharvested and partially harvested sections that were moister and cooler than the clear-cut areas. However, managing for wood frogs is more complicated than just keeping some natural areas and doing partial harvests.
You need to keep those natural movement patterns intact. And if we fragment the landscape through either forest harvesting, development, mining, any of our land uses, we can really impact the movements of those animals and decrease their success. For wood frogs, they only live 3 to 5 years, something like that. You'll see it pretty quickly. But with salamanders, they can live 20 years. So it's going to take a long time before you see the effects of what we've done.
Sean's research supports the importance of ecological forestry that mimics natural disturbances in order to protect amphibian populations. Using what they have learned, they recommend light partial harvesting as an alternative to clear cutting.